Welcome to Cut Daisies and Unicorns, and we are in the studio, and this is a continuation from last week. But it's a little bit of a gloomy day here in Chicago. The rain is falling. Oh, wee ho. So it could be messing with our technology. It could be messing with our overall spirit of things. Who knows?
You know, when you start asking about the mojo,
yeah,
what does it take? You know, how about that chemistry? You know, I was really glad when it started raining. I was like, I put down grass seed in the little spot in the patio yard, and
Perfect.
Trying to fill that up. It'll be the first year that grass has not been pooped and peed on by Gypsy. So I mean, the potential. She tore up the grass, barking at people, just getting all defensive and protective. And so then as the rain comes down and the filler gets all wet to be able to hold the moisture, then, I'm just like, this is good. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just dreary. And then, Chicago people drive like it's snowing and ice out when it starts raining.
They do.
Like, you guys, that's why you have tires.
Right.
Good tires.
It's going to be okay.
It will be fine.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, but
we're doing a continuation.
Mm-hmm.
This is part 2.
Part 2.
Duh.
Yeah. And as you can see, it's we are wearing different clothes, meaning like it's not a continuation of the same shot. We are back in the studio to do part 2.
On Wicked Wednesday, before Monday, Thursday, and
Right.
Good Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling it Wicked Wednesday.
Wicked. Yeah, I think
Is that a term from the 80s?
it could be. Yeah.
Wicked.
Yeah. Bitchin'. That would be a nice 80s term.
All right.
Yeah, I think that there's like
Girls just
there's
wanna
all
have
kinds
fun.
of titles for the Wednesday of Holy Week. I was just going through this Spy Wednesday, Silent Wednesday, Good Wednesday,
Oh.
Holy Wednesday.
Oh.
So I guess you can just pick.
Okay. All right.
So
Well,
I mean, so it's fine if you wanted to call it Wicked Wednesday too, just for the alliteration
there's Fat
purposes.
Tuesday, which is meant for wicked purposes.
Yeah.
Right before Lent starts.
Mm-hmm.
I was reflecting that Lenten season is coming to a close.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what else I was thinking about yesterday when I was thinking about this podcast?
Yeah. I mean, no, I don't know.
You want to know, though. So what I was thinking about is how that as Lent finishes out, and if just hold with me, listener, I'm not going to go on a nationalism rant, okay? But for people who are nationalists or would subscribe to a nationalistic view of the United States, I wondered if the freedom of religion thing plays a part in their thought process. And so then, based on people coming to the United States or to the Americas at the time, in the pursuit of freedom for religion or of religion, because, I mean, if we travel back across the pond, we realize that during that time, when people were coming to the Americas, that, I mean, basically church was run by the state.
Right.
And state-sponsored, state-run church. And so freedom of religion was an important part to the Founding Fathers, who not many of the Founding Fathers were evangelicals anyway.
Yeah, there were some.
There were some,
Mm-hmm.
but not many. And so then, in a nationalist's mindset, my question is, are you still for the freedom of religion? Or are you only for freedom of religion for Christianity?
All right. Yeah, and some people say freedom from religion too.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, especially when you get, like big days within Christianity,
And that's
like
what
Easter
that's what brought it up to me,
or
because
Good Friday.
we're going to have Trailer Friday on Good Friday. It's
Right.
hard to get away from this podcast and not talk about the major Christian holiday
Right.
that's taking place. It's on the calendar. Now, according to my analog calendar, I mean, the Eastern Orthodox Easter is the next week.
Right.
There's something about a Canadian Easter Monday. I was going through my calendar.
Right.
And so, like, really, interesting things. I mean, like, and again, it's by connecting the dots in the way that culture is influencing us that just brings me to ask this question, because, I mean, like, a lot of times, and we talked about this season, I think it was in the Poke the Bear episode, where, a lot of times when we talk about terrorism, we're talking about foreign terrorists.
Right.
We don't talk about, domestic terrorism. And yet we're on the day after a shooting in New York,
Right.
where the shooter has not been found. Amy and I were kicking it around last night, and she's like, yeah, they don't know if it's a he or if it's a her, or, I said, oh, they, them.
Yeah, I think I just saw on CNN this morning that they have a suspect identified.
Okay.
Whether or not, I mean, and this is always the danger of media. I mean, there's
Sure.
lots of times when you identify and then you already, dig into this person's, past, and you dig into and then it's like, oh, that wasn't them, but we've already crucified them.
Right.
So we always have to be careful of that, obviously. But I mean, that's the reason why they list him. There's a suspect, and it is a male, and I believe that he is black.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So people of color, I mean, like, when we think of foreign terrorists, we're like, in my own personal bias, just goes to people who have darker skin than me. And again, saying that, just because I see someone who's brown or black doesn't mean that I think that they're a terrorist.
Right.
This is just me being really clear for the algorithms that listen to our voices.
Right.
But in that, a lot of times, because of the fanatics, people think that all Muslims are terrorists.
Right.
And I mean, gosh, I worked with a gentleman who came to the United States, Bosnian, who was Muslim and was not anything close to a terrorist or hatred towards Christians or, people in the United States. I mean, he was grateful after, surviving what happened in Bosnia, just to have a place where he could come and raise his family and, and worked hard as a liaison for the Bosnian refugees between the state of Iowa and the Bosnian refugees, and then did such a good job, was invited to D.C. and actually had a national platform. And then when all that trailed off and the settling occurred, then he got into mortgages. And because the Bosnian community is so tight, dude was a major producer, because people, when they needed money, they came to him for a loan.
Right.
And the beautiful thing about his loans were the Bosnian people are a hardworking group of people. So when they came with 20% down.
Right.
I'm like, Ned, you the man. But I really, we had wonderful conversation, and but I mean, literally, here's a guy who went from being a professor in a university, because of the war that was going on, then was reduced. And he goes, I traded the cigarettes that the government gave me for water and bread to be able to keep my family alive. It's quite a story.
Yeah.
Quite a story. But for people who are really, and again, we've been on the record before. We're not anti the United States. We're for the United States. We're very much for the ability to think freely
Oh yeah.
and to discuss things, whether they make us feel comfortable or not.
Right.
And so then that's my question for people who would say that they're beyond for the United States, but actually move into a nationalistic mindset, saying that, the only good country in this world is the United States. And, and we have, you should look up in season, I think it'd be 1 or 2. We've got some stuff there that in the title you can see where we talk about nationalism and just the roots of that and what goes on there. And so we won't dive in. That's not the purpose of this episode.
Right.
But I did know that you and I will both be very involved in the Christian holiday, Easter, Holy Week. Not all evangelicals celebrate Holy Week, although there is a move within evangelicalism to celebrate Good Friday.
Right.
What I can really appreciate about the denomination where we're camped out at is that we do get to celebrate Maundy Thursday. And it's a beautiful topic of Christ as the servant, the beauty of communion, and being able to gather people of, I'll say, like faith together, and to be able to do that, and then to move into the celebration of resurrection. And for those who are listening, if you're there and you're like, yeah, I want freedom from God. I don't have a place. I don't believe that there is. And you know what? Cool. We're just glad you're listening, because we're going to talk about Game Changers Part 2.
Right. Yeah. So you bring up all kinds of stuff, but I would.
Yeah,
I mean, and there's, and that's where the freedom, and I think where you're talking about it, I mean, is, do we make room for the freedom from, I mean, like those people who are like, no, the United States wasn't founded with a national religion for the sake of being able, like, we didn't want to be like where we came from.
right.
And where we came from, it was very nationalized, I mean, still, European countries charge, like they already tax you whether you attend church or not.
Wow.
I mean, and then in every single service that the church provides, like, they're going to give you a fee. This is how much it costs you in order to be able to do this.
Wow.
So
I didn't realize that.
yeah. I was in particular, I think it was Germany, that they have a particular tax for the church, right?
Wow.
So so even if you don't attend, and that's why they're like, yeah, we don't mind if our cathedrals sit empty because we're still getting paid.
Wow.
So I don't know. And that's probably, yes, it's very short-sighted. I'm sure there's a lot more to it that I'm not getting into. But we're trying to be able to, if we are getting away from that, do we make freedom for others to be able to live, in a place that, yes, it is very Christianized or Judeo-Christian, right? Because on our calendars, many of the things that are there are all present because of where we come from.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so freedom of religion, freedom for religion, freedom from religion. I mean, it's so interesting how that in our language that those little words can make a difference regarding the same subject.
Right.
And then, as we look at that, I mean, so then, there's people in Christianity that see atheists and agnostics as enemies, and then you move on to, what about other people who are practicing other faith belief systems that aren't like yours. And what does that mean when we come back to a core soapbox of Steve is, why can't we love each other? I think that in the core and in the root of the teachings of Jesus, we're supposed to love all people.
Right.
And so, and it's not for what we can get out of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for what we can make them to become. I really believe that true love of God is a love that can be shared with all. And so, hey, you know what? That's us just working out. If you wonder what we believe and how we believe, that's us working out our faith parts in regards to, and when people ask, how can you think the way you think? And you know what? That in itself is its own journey. Mm-hmm. I don't think I wasn't here thinking this way 8 years ago.
Right.
Certainly not a decade ago. And so, it's just, and I won't claim the W word. I'm not a woke person. Like in regard, I don't even think that's a term that I should be even experimenting with. Where I'm at is I'm just a guy trying to figure out how to finish out the last third.
Well, and the reason why you would say not claim woke, but I would still say, I mean, if we actually look at the basic understanding is that you've been awakened to certain things, though.
Sure.
I mean, and woke can be whether it's certain injustices, things that have occurred. Like you've been awakened to the reality that those things are actually something that's happened and not just things that we're making up.
And I guess what I'm really saying is that for a people group that is fighting for wokeness, I will let that word be reserved as sacred for them to be able to take time to educate others. And it wouldn't be something that I would wear as a badge walking around the city block and say, hey, white dude with a beard, I'm woke. Because I think that gets on the other side because there's still so much that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. I will let that word be a sacred verb for other people. And, now, maybe that's just part of being a student to say, you can't be a teacher of all things, and so, and again, here's another confession. I'm just saying I got more to learn. I got a lot more to learn.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's where I think there's elements of wokeness in that. But it's fine. And I would say it's perfectly acceptable for you to be able to say that, to put that in a more, as you called it, sacred spot instead. I mean, because that's the problem. It's been weaponized.
Well, and I think that
I wouldn't have used the word anyways.
Right.
I mean, just because there's an evolution of my thought and my practice and what I've seen.
Right.
There definitely is. But I also would never would have used it, for myself or others unless it was well, why are we weaponizing it?
Yeah. And
why
actually,
are we trying to make it something that we need to fight other people on?
Yeah, it was an article yesterday on NPR that I heard, and that I think it's the UK, that concerning their elections and stuff, mm-hmm. that it's moving into an anti-woke political election. And so, and there was discussion around that. And so, I mean, to the listeners who are shaking your head, go ahead, shake your head. We're going to get on to our, the bobbleheadness of the Cut Daisies and Unicorns. We'd like to welcome you to a new adventure.
All right.
Which is actually an old adventure because we're talking about part 2 of
Shifting Gears.
Game Changers. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time on the last episode talking about technology changes. Some of them, whether or not it was good or bad, there was still definite game-changing technology that has come into play that has changed things.
Yeah.
And yes, we talked about good and bad.
Yep.
But there is definite things that we talked about that have been game changers for us, but also for the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we wanted to switch it and say, because
this is Phil's brainchild here.
Right.
And
I did bring
one.
I brought it up at the end just because saying so, but there's also people that can be game changers.
That's true.
And we can talk about, yes, the people who invented the technology could also be a game changer, sure.
Yeah, but that's not what we're saying.
Right, but we're also saying, like, the game-changing people both in our lives and in the world that said, hey, let me just, throw this in here. How can I get you to think differently, to be differently, whatever, So game-changing people.
Yeah.
So who comes to mind when you think about game-changing people?
As you're talking, if I'm going to be honest and transparent, the person who came to my mind, let me preface it by this. Sometimes game changers aren't recognized in the present moment. But upon reflection, you can see how they change the game.
That's a good way to think about it.
And that can be in our own personal lives.
Right.
That, like, going through a situation, we don't think of that person as a game changer, but then as more miles get behind us, more days get behind us, we can look back and we'd be like, oh my word, that person was an incredible change agent in my life. Mm-hmm. Now, back to honesty and transparency. So, as you were saying that, and I was thinking about it yesterday as I was very adaptly involved in Domestic Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And so I had a list of people I was thinking through, but when you said game changer, and like I'm gonna go into, we're still on the United States and politics and such. Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, like and that's where I went to. I didn't vote for Barack. President Obama. Mm-hmm. I don't even remember voting the second term. But I think now, like, if you ask me to talk his policy, couldn't do that. I mean, if I'm well aware of the healthcare changes that took place, quite frankly, my children benefited from that incredibly. And the major change was, there's two major changes in healthcare. One, pre-existing conditions got eradicated, basically. And then the other one was children being able to stay on your health care until they're 26. Mm-hmm. And why they picked 26, I have no idea. Like, we've talked about that before, but it seems to be a very maturing time frame, both for my daughter and my son. By the time they hit 26, they were making adult decisions in a good way. And so, so there was healthcare. Then the other thing is just the churning in regards to the birth certificate, and the churning concerning the militancy of the church where he attended, and whether he was an activist in the Muslim nation or not. So like there was a lot going on in and around there. And so, but the thing that I hear when I hear him speak is I hear an eloquence. I'm not sure at the time I would have called him a statesman. Hindsight 2020, he's certainly, holds a very statesman-esque a stance. So I'm just throwing that out there. And this is against the grid of Bill Clinton, and against the grid of Donald Trump, and against the grid of Joe Biden. And, and I think a lot of people, when it comes to politics, they're like, oh my gosh, it's a game. So, so for the cynics and things, and he didn't, as far, like, that's not even me talking about personally people that have been game changers in my life.
Right.
I'm just, and people could say, yeah, he changed the game. Man, the U.S. went to the toilet and swirled around a long time under his leadership, and that's the part about freedom of speech, is that you can have your opinion and you can say the things that you want to.
Right.
And so, anyway, that he jumped into my mind. What about you?
Yeah, there's lots of thoughts there. I'm not even sure. I may have voted for him once, but I know I didn't do both. But I do see that there was a big shift during that era and I think it was occurring, yes, before that, but yeah, I would agree with you there. So for me, I guess I'm, it's always hard, thinking big picture about like game changing people, because I always think more local, personal, game changing people versus on a broad scale. Because on like out there, I even though there's lots of flaws, Steve Jobs, was, just the way that, like kind of that story with, he was kind of working for Macintosh, Apple, and then, they fired him.
Yeah.
And then it was like, yeah, and we're not going so well. And then when he came back, it like his persona was changed. And some of the ways that he then carried out, like, hey, like, he wore his like, turtleneck, or he wore sandals. Like there was a shift in the way that he wanted to lead, versus the way that he had started.
Yeah.
And I think that from that place, and whether or not, and yes, we talked about the smartphone as far as technology, Apple was a leader in that.
Yeah.
The iPhone was, a definite, game changer. We've talked about that before. But even just the way that he kind of presented himself, more in this visionary, like, hey, like, this is what we're going to do. When he had left, Mac or Apple the first time, and then he went and, just said, hey, let's pick up an animation thing, so he started Pixar. So it's just this, and then eventually, Pixar was, defeating Disney, and so Disney's like, crap, we need to purchase it.
Yeah.
And so when you get purchased by Disney, you won.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was just that thinking from him, whether he was the actual one who came up with all the technology, probably not. But he was thinking more on terms of like, what can this do? And that's why he was more protective of like thoughts, like, I've got to make sure not to, I'm gonna surprise people with this. I want to do, but I think that there was a lot of it that he was thinking innovation. He was thinking like, how can I constantly change this?
Yeah. And
I think there were parts of that then. Yes, we can talk about the bad side of the technology that came from it. We've already done that.
Sure, right.
But it's just that kind of thinking, saying like, I don't want to be here still. Let's think already, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in advance. Let's think about what this can be or could be or should be. And kind of that innovation thinking,
that inspires you.
Right. It's like, okay, like, that's a good place to be able to think about. How are you leading?
Sure.
And yeah, a lot of people said he was an ass.
Yeah.
But and I'm not even looking at it that way, like I want to be that. No, I don't want to be that. But I think just thinking about how do you shift and become more of yourself in that versus like trying to be like the corporate role. Like I've got to wear this suit, 3-piece suit. I've got to make sure to look the part. Like what can it look like when you become yourself in the position that you've been given? And I think that is also, the more of the parts that I think are game changing, because if you can be yourself more, then there's going to be more of like people are going to attach themselves more to a unique, like instead of like the $5 version of somebody else.
Yeah. Man, I mean, so many good things out of that, because you bring up that here's a person who did make change possible. The part where like that was inspiring to you. And then you bring up a really major core for humanity is to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And to be yourself, like to have value in that who you are and what you're here for matters and makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so embrace you.
Yeah, instead of trying to embrace like what do people want me to be, or what should I be?
Right.
Like instead of being able to say who am I, like cuz there is only one of you.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we might have identical twins out there that look like, but you're still a unique you.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to be somebody else, let's figure out how to be ourselves.
It's the unicorn part.
Right.
Of cut daisies and unicorns.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And so, which is a value piece that we can portray in regards to that. When you were talking about the uniform, and a shout out to, I'm going to change the camera here for those who are listening. Phil, you can see the blackbird. Yeah, that's from a brewery. Mm-hmm. And what's the name of the place again?
This is Rare Bird.
Rare Bird, Traverse City, Michigan. Mm-hmm. Yeah, shout out to the fam in Traverse City, and yeah, Rare Bird Brewery. When I swung through that place with my cousin Brandon, I saw the red shirt. I was looking for something a little different from a black and white, a black T-shirt with white print. Mm-hmm. And but I also fronted a band called the Blackbird Circus, and so I was like, "Oh, me and Phil need to be twinsies on this." So I bought me a shirt, I bought Phil a shirt, right. And we got that rolling. But going back to uniform, I remember that there was a time at a previous employer when things were getting a little shifty with what people were wearing to work, and so we were kind of forewarned, hey, the policy book's coming out, and so we're gonna get that updated so that everybody knows what they need to wear to and coming to work. And I'm like, really? The policy book is coming out. Now, mind you, didn't ever see the policy book. Now, I didn't walk in to work. People who know me know that I'm not going to wear shorts in public often.
Right.
Okay. Uh-huh. I mean, people make fun of me for not wearing shorts when it's so hot out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that was something that was on me, because I thought to myself, anytime I was sitting to listen to someone sing, shorts are distracting. I mean, and just because you're hot doesn't mean you can't be uncomfortable. Right. So if I was performing, I would not want to be a distraction. And, and so, but I valued my outfit or my uniform for work, which was a pair of jeans and a T-shirt. Mm-hmm. Or I moved into, I'd wear a pair of jeans and then my collared shirt was a Dickies long sleeve. Roll the sleeves. And people, I just walked in to the person who made the announcement, hey, we got to watch dress code, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what's that dress code going to look like? Well, they're talking about, if you're going to wear short sleeves, it's got to be a golf shirt and all this other stuff. And I'm like, hey, here's my 2 weeks. And the person's like, what? I'm like, if you're going to do a dress code like that, I'm done. And they were floored. They're like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, no, you didn't have a dress code. I wasn't given a policy book on my employment. There wasn't a dress code that was explained to me. I am who I am, and I value my uniform. You would quit your job. I'm like, I wasn't looking for this job when I got it anyway.
Right.
I mean, I was placed here by a greater power than me. And so, like, and who I am is what I am. And so the answer, yeah, here's my 2 weeks. Well, don't do that. Okay. Great.
Right.
Just so we're all clear.
Right. Because obviously, if somebody like this just pops up, either somebody complained and you're now trying to rewrite policy based on a complaint, or you're trying to address somebody that you have an issue with that you're not willing to address.
Well, and I mean, for the worship teams that I led, I told ladies, I'm like, I'm not here to tell you how long your skirts or dresses are. Just realize that you're elevated and, on a platform. And so, I mean, but I mean, like, there were even people that down the road came down and be like, we'd really like all the worship people to be dressed the same. So is there a way you can, like, buy a certain shirt that they can wear? I'm like, then what am I supposed to do? Send emails out to be able to be on rotation so that we can all be wearing a different colored shirt each? And I mean, and people listening are like, really? Yeah. Really? And the answer, I'm just, ultimately what I'm coming back to is, in being the unique you, know what you value, and so.
Yeah. And are we trying to make everybody like everybody? I mean,
right.
That's a dangerous path to be able to follow.
The slippery slope.
Right.
But I'll buy all kinds of things at Goodwill, all kinds of things. But I got two no-nos. Never going to buy underwear.
Right.
And shoes. I'll save up for a year. Well, actually, I did save up for a year for a pair of Fry boots that I bought in Traverse City, Michigan, actually. This is, full circle.
Yeah.
But, saved up for a full year. Now, these were, back in the day, probably a decade ago, or, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago. It all gets fuzzy. I can't even remember yesterday, parts of it.
Right.
But, a pair of harness boots. I was at a conference, and I saw this guy's boots. I'm like, man, those are great. I'd like a pair of those. And he told me, it's like, they're Fry's. And he goes, I order 3 different sizes, try them on, and ship them back. I'm like, well, I wasn't there. But I'm like, when I find a pair to be able to try on, then I'm going to have the money saved up for. I mean, at the time, they're $375. I mean, now people in Texas are like, $375 for boots. Nothing. Pshaw.
I'll buy 3 pairs just to be able to send 2 back.
But now those boots lasted me. I think I retired them last year. So like 8 years.
Yeah.
Now I had them rehealed 6 times and had them resold twice. But again, that's a personal value. I have the same pair of black wingtips that I bought when I was at Gloria Day that are probably about the same age. But I've had them resold twice and had heels on them at least 3 times. Now I'm not wearing wingtips very often.
Right.
I did notice I have a hole in my sole. It shows up when it's
Hole
wet.
in the soul.
I got a hole in my soul. There is a hole in my soul.
Sounds like a song.
Yeah, it does. Man, I keep writing. I'm writing lyrics. I keep writing, given to that. But yeah, grumpy mania.
Grumpy mania.
So values,
Yeah.
and I think that's something, if you say, well, I don't know what I value. Oh, I think you do. You just haven't taken time to identify it. What you should do is you should get a blank piece of paper and a pen and sit down, turn on some TV show that you've already seen before or a movie, or turn on the radio, listen to some music, play some vinyl if you're that dude, Prenger. And just sit down and say, what things am I willing to quit over? Like, it matters to me so much that I could walk away. There's where your values come up,
Right.
And so one of the things that you've taught me, you're a game changer in my life. One of the things that you've taught me is a richer love. And I think that as I was working yesterday around the house, I just was reminded how those are the acts that are, like, love has to cost you something, like when you're moving in a direction that wouldn't be your normal direction. Love isn't the frilly, the feel goods. Love isn't the kisses and the smooches and the hugs. But love is, it's a sacrificial, or there's a sacrificing self in that. And I wasn't even meaning to like drop that on you, but because I wasn't thinking about it. Actually, folks, if I'm going to be transparent and honest again, I haven't thought much about any of the words that I'm saying here today. But man, if you want to figure out yourself, sit down and take a look in the mirror, which has been a coined phrase of mine for about 3 weeks. Look in the mirror, write down, what are you willing to quit over? And what would you be willing to walk away? If there aren't many things that you're willing to walk away for, then you can see that what you're in is something that you value. How do you like how I twisted that?
Yeah, because I think it's a good question to be able to ask yourself, what am I willing to quit over?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that could go for relationship. It could go for job. I mean, I know
at the time with the illustration, I was talking about my job at
employment,
the time.
right?
Yeah. But it's about what about toxic friendships that, I mean, like, you find yourself in the middle of?
Well, it reminds me of like boundaries,
Yeah.
and the boundaries could be those particular value sets.
Absolutely.
And that's where you'd say, like, hey, like, this is what I value. So all of a sudden somebody tramples on it and you're like, yeah, so like, let's dig through that. I'm like, we don't have to automatically just throw, somebody out, but like, can I push back on this? And then then they dig in further. Then, like, that's going to be their value. And then you're like, all right, so we definitely don't mix here.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't something that, that I'm willing to budge on. And it doesn't sound like you're willing to either. And so therefore, a boundary has been set.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just because you quit something or someone doesn't mean that you don't love them.
Right.
I mean, that's when in people's minds, they're like, oh, I need to cut that off. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a love or an appreciation of, or, that's a dualistic mindset of one against the other.
Right.
In regards to, and a dualistic mind will take somebody into a place to say, oh, then if I'm willing to have that relationship, then I'm for them, but against these others. And that's not the only way to be able to embrace humanity.
Right. Yeah, and that is a good way to be able to put that, because you can still have a love for people without being able to say, like, you're my people too.
Right.
Like, because we may not get along, but there's no call for us to try to to appease everybody, or to be liked by everybody.
Yeah.
It is a call to be able to say, yes, we should love people, but it doesn't mean we have to always agree on everything as well.
Oh,
so
absolutely. And I mean, for instance, I've met people who are of the Mormon faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not for polygamy.
Right.
And in regards to that, there's a different belief system there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that doesn't mean that every time I sit down and talk to someone of the Mormon faith, that doesn't mean that that's the thing that I'm going to poke at, or, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be a place where, or a relationship that I'm going to like dive into and we're going to be besties either.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately the look in the mirror isn't about others. It's about you. It's about you learning yourself. Right. And in that, and how can we identify who we are, what we value, and are there identifiers of change that need to occur also within ourselves?
Right. Yeah, that's good. Going back, I mean, like, thinking personally, I mean, you did mention game-changing people. I mean, you are a game changer for me too.
Aw.
So like, I mean, I didn't want to push back on that, but I mean, like, it's the same. I mean, like that evolution of our relationship as well. I mean, things that I've learned from you, but even it's also been a mindset switch too. I mean, the stuff that, that you've learned and then is like from you, then I learned from you.
Uh-huh.
And those people, like Roar, Father Roar, right? I mean, dualism.
Yes. He was so
right.
like the next person that I was going to bring up.
Right.
I mean, that dude, 80 years old plus,
mm-hmm.
struggling with physical ailments and being ostracized by the evangelical community currently.
Right.
Because of his teachings on the Christ. And with great caution, I did have another friend who mentioned that you have to be careful who you introduce to Roar. As far as the ability of, I mean, that dude's out there. Like, what has crossed his mind? I look at him as a spiritual Einstein. And his ability. Now, the dude has practiced celibacy and has given himself, like, he's taken retreats and where he's like vowed not to talk for like a month or 60 days. And or he does it the opposite way, where he doesn't read anything except for the sacred texts, to let God talk to him about what God wants, instead of another man's writings or another woman's writings influencing him. But go ahead with Roar and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I was just saying, I mean, like, what I see from the influence from you is also then multiple other influence. I mean, and Roar was just an example, but
yeah.
But there's other things that you've taught me along the way, and even just musically as well. Lots of things that I've learned from you, from just being, and hey, you should listen to this, or you should dig into this, or, concerts, whatever it might be. We've, like, introducing a, not just a different genre, but just even an understanding, because I've always loved music.
Sure.
But there's like, your influence and game-changing parts in me is like seeing things differently. And also more towards an appreciation of like lyrical content. And yes, I mean, I liked lyrics before, but there was more like, I wanted, because there's a listening to it,
yeah,
and then there's a hearing it, you know, and being able to dig into like what is it that they're saying. And sometimes people are like, yeah, those lyrics didn't mean anything, but it doesn't mean anything to me, right? So so it just kind of, you know, that shift as well kind of has taken place, you know, in kind of that context of relationship. So
yeah. Well, cool.
yeah.
One of the things that a change agent in my life was Ron Burcham.
Mm-hmm.
First, no, he wasn't the first. Second lead pastor that I ever worked for or with. And what I really appreciated about what he and this was a catalytic moment. It was within my first year working at Gloria Day, and he pulled me into the office, and he's like, dude, these people are your friends. He's like, you don't know it yet, but they are. He's like, you are wise to use your ears and your mouth in ratio. He's like, you don't have to defend your position. You don't have to defend what's going on. He goes, you have my full support. Spend more time listening. If you go back to when we were the first year sitting around a conference table at the directors, versus the last year you were there sitting around at the directors, that job transformed me from a talker to a listener. And I spend plenty of time. People are like, "Oh, really, man? We listen to this podcast, and you can manage plenty of talking." I'm like, "Well,
doesn't mean you can't talk."
exactly. But it is the vantage point. It's the point of view. It's being able to hear and to listen what people are doing and saying, and you know, and it's one of the things that I enjoy doing. Now, I enjoy setting a trap. And so if you let people talk long enough, they'll give you everything you need to be able to set the trap. And then it's just like fishing, man. You got to have the right lure.
Having the right bait.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that with, you know, I mean, people, I mean, you go back to, you know, like family origins as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, parents are always going to influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and they will ultimately, you know, start the game.
Sure.
You know, so whether or not you can say game changers, they may, you know, like thinking of, you know, my parents, they probably spoke things, you know, through life that also can be seen as, you know, changing games.
Yeah.
But there's kind of the origin.
Yeah.
You know, my wife,
yeah.
even though I met her, I was in like 7th grade.
Yeah.
And she was even talking about this the other day. She's like, you know, thinking about, she's like, we've known each other for a long time. And
yeah,
like,
you have.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, you have.
Like I've known her more than, you know, even my life prior. I mean, to her.
Right.
You know, I've known her more now. So it's,
yeah.
So it's, there's definite things that happen within marriage that are game changing.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, kids then change the whole structure. You know, as you know as well.
Yeah.
I mean, like having children changes the way that you're viewing the world. You know, because now you're like, oh, I've got like little people that I'm supposed to be in charge of.
Yeah.
Like I can't just think about me.
Yeah.
And I can't just think about my wife. Like we have to focus on some children too.
Yeah.
And so that changes, you know, the game. So, you know, so those are some of the pieces that have, you know, that also come into play when you're looking at game changing moments and people.
Yeah.
Is like, there's things that happen, you know, in relationship that, when you know, like, these are my people.
Yeah.
And if they're your people, these people are going to obviously change things for you.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the most beautiful things that I've ever heard in my life was spoken by my son 2 days after his son Wesley was born. And he looked at me, he gave me a hug. And he said, I never knew how much you loved me until I learned how much I love my son. I thought, just blew me away. Just blew me away.
Yeah.
And I told him, I'm like, dude, I do. I will. And he said, there's nothing you've ever done or you could ever do that would change the love that I have for you. And yeah. Hold that one real close.
Yeah.
And I thought, gosh, this kid's growing up and just thinking things in ways that I never thought. And that's what I can appreciate about it. Because I don't, I always knew the love that my mom and my dad have for me. But here, he put that into this moment, having a child. This is a game-changing moment in my life. And it doesn't only affect me, but it affects how I'm interacting, viewing, and thinking of others, too. I'm like, but, oh, my gosh, yeah. Yeah, so beautiful.
Yeah, that's
tears of joy.
That's profound, too. I mean,
that's
just being able to
exactly,
speak from that.
Yeah. And you know what? That kid is an entrepreneur. He's a risk taker. He's willing to go places that other people aren't willing to go to. But that he took the risk to say it out loud. Man.
Yeah. And that's what I even, mean by that is like, because there's probably, I mean, we understand that statement, but yet I never spoke that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. And that is the cool thing about people who are game changers in our lives. And how many times have you heard other people say, like the teacher saying to the student, oh, no, really, I've learned more from you than I've ever taught you. And so, yeah, whether you're a Padawan or whether you are a rabbi or whether you are, if you want to use a Christianese word like disciple, rabbi to disciple, teacher to student, that is this thing. And quite frankly, I think it's a posture of relationship to keep learning.
Right.
And then as you learn, then the opportunities for who you will teach, that comes up.
Yeah, because that reminds me of like a reverse mentorship too.
Oh yeah.
Because like the mentor can say, "Hey, I'm mentoring you, so therefore I'm going to give you everything," and but as a mentor, you should also be able to say, "Oh, what can you also teach me?"
Yeah.
And that's where that kind of reverse thing happens. The circular, cyclical, spiral. Like is this in reverse as well? Like, are you willing to be open, not just to lead, but all, or to parent and not be in the same way learning, from your student, from your, children, from your whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's we go back to things that we talked about on the podcast about being a lifelong learner. And that means learning from these people that are, in our lives and in our circles and in our, our influencers, our game changers, and if we're not willing to both teach and learn, then we're probably missing out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that ends up being the whole, or coming down to, if we're going to boil this episode, there is no way to name all the people of influence in our own lives.
Oh yeah.
There's just no way. Because as two men who are committed to being lifelong learners, we've learned so much from so many.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another thing. I mean, we value relationship.
Right.
And so in a relationship isn't a dictatorship. It's an exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's key, I think, is being able to identify it and see it. And what I would say is, like, to be bolder in relationship, to be able to be like Micah and say the things that are actually, hey, like, this is a game-changing moment, and I don't want to just, receive it and soak it in, but I also want to speak it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, how many times, that people have influenced me that I haven't, I haven't, said anything to them. I haven't talked to them about it. I haven't said, hey, here, like, this is something I learned, but why? Why did I, stay silent on that?
Yeah.
So we should learn to be able to speak, and you mentioned, game-changing things. Sometimes we look back on,
Mm-hmm.
like, and say, oh, like, it started here, like, I just didn't see all of the pieces. And yeah. So it's not too late for us to also speak it.
Well, and I just think that's the part that if you're committed to, being in relationship with others, a lot of times that relationship is stirred on by position, an appointment.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that it can't be rich and healthy, and so, yeah, I know that if you're listening to the podcast and you're like, well, you didn't say my name, I guarantee you that if you reach out to me, I can tell you what I've learned from you, at least one thing by our interaction and stuff. And so,
yeah.
I think about Jessica, the piano player at Glory Day, and how I still remember the first time I sat a notebook in front of her with only chords. And she said, "What is this crap?" But so, like, in that situation, it'd be like, "Oh, Steve, you were being a game changer in her life." And I'm like, "Oh, but she was a game changer in my life too, because I stood firm." See, I had to learn how to do that. That's not my, I'm a compliant child, and so, but I stood firm. I'm like, come on. 7 years later, she told me, she's like, "You've changed the way that I think about music. Now I don't even want the arrangements in front of me." But I bring that up only because it was in that difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
She changed my life because I knew I had to be firm, stand, not be a jerk, and there was a goal that we had to work towards. And so that's the part. We're all teaching somebody, and we're all learning from someone. Yeah. And so good, bad, or indifference would not be part of that. Mm-hmm. So hey, if you're sitting down and you're writing through, what are the things that I value? Then take time and reminisce. Think about the things that have been catalysts of change in your life, the people who've been a part of that change. Maybe it's time to reach out.
Right.
And shoot a text or make a phone call and, have a chat with somebody and just say, "Hey, I was reflecting on this and I just wanted to let you know."
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity. Since you're already going to go through values.
Yeah.
Then you also say people.
Yeah.
And like the people you learned negatively from, you don't necessarily have to say, "Hey, I learned a lot from you.
I learned what not to do by watching
because
this.
You were a poor leader." You don't
you
have to do that.
No,
but
no.
yeah. Yeah, but thinking through your game changers. Yeah, because it'll also be able to help remind you of some of your values too.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think this is one that we can go back to again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
But for this week, and when you hear this, we can say, Happy Easter.
Right. Happy Easter.
Yeah, Happy Easter. And if you're listening to this 4 years from now, you might be listening to it on a non-Easter holiday weekend. But we're going through, in our timeline, we're going through Holy Week right now. All right,
everybody. We're going to call that the wrap today. And hopefully you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, your Easter. And we'll be excited to bring new topics next week.
I think we're going for...
We're going to go for Fringe?
The Fringe. We're overdue.
Right.
And I gotta get down to the bottom of the well, dig out some new stuff. And so, Fringe episode.
Right. So that's something for you to look forward to.
It's coming up. All right.
Take care, everybody.